how do we do things better? How do we maximize like the assembly line process and be more efficient with it? I said, I really feel like I've gotten to the point where I'm doing the things that I should be doing at the times when I should be doing them. And it's saving me so much time that I feel like I have more time in my day. And I honestly, I see some of my colleagues just frazzled at the end of the term, just, desperately needing more time to get things done. And I don't feel that way anymore. Like I have had that time in my life when I was first teaching where I felt stressed and panicked about everything at the end. And I really feel like I've learned how to manage my time to the point where I've got something to share with other people. And it's not about sacrificing quality. It's about making the most of your minutes.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yanik, your host, and now joining me, Alan Linnihan. Alan Linnihan is the author of Teacher Time Management, published by Solution Tree in 2025. Welcome, Miss Alan Linnihan, to the show. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Who is Alan Linnihan in simply one powerful sentence?
That's a big sentence. Well, I would say Ellen Linnihan is a passionate teacher who tries to infuse a love for learning in all of her students.
Beautiful, and I can really tell this while reading your book, that you have this passion, this caring, and really this high standard to make sure that students really get the best out of their education. So now, just to frame a little bit our discussion, let's start by giving our listeners a definition of education from K to 12. What should education do according to you?
Right. Well, I think there's a basic level of looking at education as being transactional. It's giving knowledge and it's receiving knowledge. But I think that's such a basic level of looking at learning. I think education really should be about infusing a love of learning so that students develop a mindset of acquiring knowledge and then putting it to use, finding ways to be creative and use that knowledge moving forward. So I like to think of it more as a relationship than a transaction, because I'm hoping that I'm building a love for learning within my students that they will take way beyond the confines of my classroom door.
Where do you find your love for learning and really looking at education as somehow like a relationship for developing this hunger for a life of constant learning?
hmm Yeah, I really feel like helping students find their voice is the most important thing that I can do as an educator. Now, obviously, I teach English and also public speaking, so there's physical voice that goes with that, and there's the writing voice. But I think finding voice is really about finding out who you are. How do you fit into this world and how do you make a meaningful mark on it? And when students can really take that goal and figure that out, that's so powerful. That's launching them into a whole lifetime of learning and also giving back to the community, finding a way to be a meaningful part of humanity. So I think finding voice is really my mission to help students do that.
What do you think is the reason why the US is so good in producing outstanding public speakers, because as you mentioned, I think this is one of the most powerful things what we actually can convey to our students. And really, as you say, finding a voice, right? Finding yourself, because it's almost like finding yourself, right? It's like the biggest art, the biggest quest. It's like this perennial question of really finding who you truly are. And probably it takes a lifelong. But what do you think is it that the US has so incredible speakers, and why it is also taught? Because you are teaching at the school, right? And you teach public speaking. And where does this come from, actually? I'm really curious, because I, for example, I'm in Canada, so we don't have public speaking classes. Some school have, but generally it's not something that I'm very much familiar with. But with the concept, I find it really powerful, and I want to know where this come from, and really why do you have so many great public speakers?
That's a great question. I haven't thought about it significantly just within America, but obviously that's where I'm familiar with that audience. The kids in our district start really young with presentations. My own children, I have four that went through the same school district. They started very young giving presentations on, simple, they're even in kindergarten, they bring their 100-day objects. My daughter brought all her little Barbie shoes and did a little talk about why she chose the Barbie shoes. Oh, the lights went off in my classroom. Are we okay with the light, or should I get up and move?
For sure, not a problem, not a problem.
Okay. So I should get up and move, or no?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Okay. If we're okay like this, I guess.
Yeah,
Well,
I
no,
mean,
I'll get up.
yeah, that's good. Let's go. Not a problem. That's good.
Okay.
Let's
All
fix
right.
the
Sounds
light.
good. All
For
right.
sure.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Used to
you
students
can
moving.
fix it. You can fix
Okay.
it.
All right. I'll fix
Absolutely,
it.
not a
Give me one
problem.
second. Okay. I'm used to students being in here and keeping the lights on.
Very nice.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem at
So,
all.
in terms of public speaking for America, I just feel like we start so young teaching these kids that they do have a voice and their voice matters. And it starts, probably primarily in the English classes where they're doing presentations, but I've seen it across the board with, little, dioramas of different like Native American huts that they would have in the middle school or in the elementary school. So I feel like it starts really at a young age, and the kids aren't afraid to be up in front of the class. And that familiarity just really makes it so much easier the next time. But I will say, I teach through the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh as well. I teach dual enrollment courses here at the high school, and it's fascinating to me that when we have our conferences with the other teachers who do that around the state, their number one complaint about their students when they teach public speaking is that they're glued into their phones and they don't talk to each other in between speeches. And that just absolutely floored me, because in our school, we require the kids to put their phones into a phone caddy when they come into the classroom door. So they don't have their phones during class. But I really see that as such a danger zone for young people right now, because asking them to monitor their phones on their own is really hard. I mean, it's just natural to want to grab that phone. And especially if you're in an uncomfortable environment like a public speaking class where maybe you are just trying to, get through it and not draw a lot of attention to yourself. I think that the tendency is to go into those phones and to hide there. But when we take that away and we build up some confidence, the kids really feel comfortable with it very quickly. So I may be going off on a tangent here, but one of the things that I do is a question of the day for attendance. And so every day the kids get up in alphabetical order and they answer whatever my silly question of the day is. Today was what theme park job would you want? And then one of my other classes was, where do you get your news? Very interesting how many kids get their news off of TikTok, by the way. It's a little alarming. But just those silly little questions, those icebreaker questions, the first couple of days of a term, Some of them are really nervous. They're really hesitant to go up in front of the class and just say something simple, you know, theme park job. Who cares what it is, making the popcorn, whatever. But that repetition of walking up to the front of the classroom every single day breaks down the barriers so quickly. And they really literally find their voice. And the kids who get bright red when they speak, it stops happening after the first couple of days. They start to get comfortable and suddenly realize that they're pretty powerful. They have a voice. So to me, that's just one of the best things of teaching, is seeing that happen.
And you really nail it. And now I really understand it, because I was just recently teaching at an American school, outstanding school, American school in Costa Rica. The founder, Peter Swing, just incredible. And they did the same thing. So, but I wasn't aware that it's actually across, really the US. And now it makes sense why. Now I know why so many other nations lag so behind in terms of marketing, in terms of like selling a vision. My dream when I was a little kid, it was always like the US. It's really powerful, and it's just the number one country that it really inspires like the world. It's incredible, so it makes really sense. And again, it's all about repetition, practice, and really losing this kind of fear. So it's fantastic. I really, really love that. That's wonderful. And also, I want to mention what you are just saying is really that you you build something in them that really helps them develop their personality, and really help addressing like the biggest fear, and that is somehow like being laughed at.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a very powerful skill to acquire, because I always tell them you can pay somebody to do just about anything in life. I mean, there are very few tasks that you can't find somebody that you could find somebody to do it for you, but nobody's going to speak for you, right? You have to have your own voice. Whatever, even if you think you're going to be, you know, I'm going to stay home and raise my children and I'm never going to have a real job, whatever, you're going to have to speak to neighbors. You're going to have to speak to your kids, teachers. You're going to have to speak to people in the grocery store. Everybody needs to have a voice. And where you take it, whatever level, wherever that is, it's important that you feel like you have control over that and that you can give the message that you want to give.
And it's also in this new age. I was just listening yesterday. I think it was Elon Musk who said at some point in a couple of months or so, or in a couple of years, we will be able to just you put in Chat GPT and so on, to make a video just for us, and it will just do a video. And so when you think about this, really, ultimately, what we are looking for at the end, in a few years down the road, is people want to see authenticity again. They want to see real people, because ultimately you can just type in whatever and you put it copy paste, and a video comes out. At some point it's oversaturated, and people, because it happened to me, sometimes you listen to a YouTube video and there's only pictures, and immediately I feel this is AI, and I
Right.
just immediately I turn it off. It's just, it turns me off, because there's no connection. There's something very powerful when you actually see people also making mistakes, right? That's what it all is, right? And then you grow from there. So really powerful, wonderful that you're doing this, and I can really feel that you're really living your job. You really love it. And now, of course, let's go and dive into your book, because what I find so powerful, it's all about optimization. You really have an integrated approach, and so that you really, as you mentioned in the subtitle, how to prioritize your day so you can enjoy your evening as a teacher. Okay,
Right.
so just first and foremost, what made you write the book in the first place? Was your epiphany that you said, you know what, I gotta hear something that is powerful, I gotta share it with my colleagues and really the world?
Yeah. So it was actually about this time of year, about 2 years ago. And I really had gotten to the point where we're on the block schedule, which means that our classes end every 9 weeks. And so I was at the point where I was kind of done with my term, but I still had kids for a few more days. And I was spinning my wheels a little bit because I was pre planning for the next term. I was doing all these things to get ready for the next term. And I honestly felt like, wow, I'm almost maybe even a little bit bored in my planning time. Like I've got it done. I'm ready to go. And I was explaining this to my husband who's in business. And he said, well, it sounds a lot like The Goal, which is this, I guess, quintessential book that people in the business world read that basically it's written like a novel, but it's about a manager who comes into a factory and figures out how do we do things better? How do we maximize like the assembly line process and be more efficient with it? I said I really feel like I've gotten to the point where I'm doing the things that I should be doing at the times when I should be doing them, and it's saving me so much time that I feel like I have more time in my day. And I honestly, I see some of my colleagues just frazzled at the end of the term, just, desperately needing more time to get things done. And I don't feel that way anymore. Like I have had that time in my life when I was first teaching where I felt stressed and panicked about everything at the end. And I really feel like I've learned how to manage my time to the point where I've got something to share with other people. And it's not about sacrificing quality. It's about making the most of your minutes so that you can be the best possible teacher that you can be and still have a life. Still model that for your students, which I think is important for them to see. So I guess that was kind of it. I was just kind of feeling like, wow, I'm feeling good about my job and I feel like I've got everything under control. And yeah, my husband said, maybe that's your next book. So
That is fantastic, and I love that also that you really, you're not just focusing on, let's say, education, but business and all these different disciplines have can teach us so much, right? So if we can really have like a more interdisciplinary approach, and we can just gradually improve our practice as you really show it. And I loved in so many ways also when it comes to giving feedback students, right? Really put it in a folder, basically Excel and whatever, because it's just time and again, they're the same things that we have to raise attention to. And if you write it every time, it just takes time and it really adds up. And so you really show that this is so crucial. So let's dive into it. Low
mhm,
concentration, what do you do? For example, let's say I go into my classroom, I have my students there, and I kind of discover, okay, there are three stages that you really identified: the low, the medium, and the high concentration stage. So let's start with the low concentration um, state.
sure. Right. So low concentration mode is when it's kind of chaotic. I mean, there's usually a lot happening in the classroom. The kids are asking you questions. You're providing information about different things. You're very hands on with the activities that are happening in the classroom. It's not the time where you sit down and you grade your essays. That's even if you could read a page, it's not the time to do it. It's not the most not the time that you can concentrate the best. So low concentration mode is getting things done that take a small amount of time, like 5 minutes or less, kind of thing. And sometimes it's just you're kind of in crowd control mode, and you have to be ready to be responsive if students have questions. So you can't get too deep into anything. So things that I do during that mode, it might be pre-writing an email, getting ready to send out, and like reminding, or maybe just making a list of the things as an idea comes to me. I've got a little post-it note on my desk to remind myself next time I'm in medium or high concentration mode, I'm going to take care of that. But when you can free the mind of the things that are weighing you down, you can focus better. So if I'm like, oh gosh, I really need to remember to send that parent email out, if I write myself a little post-it note, then I could forget thinking about that. And then I know I'm going to come back to it because I've got my post-it. I'm going to circle back to that because it's important when I have time to think about it. So there are a lot of things that you can knock out in low concentration mode, and students are often in that same mode at the same time. So it might be the last 5 minutes of class. A lot of times people just kind of wind up like, okay, we're done. Like, let's just wind it up for the day. And I get that too. There are days like that too. But there's usually something like, hey, have you taken care of signing up for the AP test yet? This would be a great time to do that. That's only going to take you 5 minutes, but you got to knock it out. Or have you, depending on the class, there are always little administrative things that kids could be taking care of. So sometimes I'll just write on a Google Doc what to do right now, just those words, and I'll have some bullet points of, okay, these are 5-minute tasks that you all could take care of. If you're in my brain is shut down mode, I can't focus anymore. What you could do is put a note in your calendar to remind yourself to take care of something later on. But just sitting here and wasting that 5 minutes, now, I don't consider talking with your friend next to you necessarily a waste. There are times when you need to do that too. But if you're talking about getting the most bang out of your minutes, having a focused, these are the kinds of things that we can do during low concentration mode to best use our time. That's a really good skill to teach to students as well. Don't get in the habit of shutting down. And a lot of times, because I start over every 9 weeks, we'll have work time in the last half hour of the class, and the kids will start. We end our day at 3:09. So 3 o'clock on the digital clock for block 4 is like the magic. We're done, right? Like we've hit 3. That's it. I'm like, 9 minutes times 5. I'm not a math teacher, but I think that adds up to almost an hour for the week. And if we shut down every single day, 9 minutes before the end of the block, you're getting an hour less of instruction than my third block that doesn't do that. So, kind of teaching them to recognize the habits that they get into, monitoring that low concentration mode so that they're not wasting it is really important, because those minutes really, really add up in the end, even if they are only a few here and there. Um, some other things that I do are just like entering grades. Sometimes I'll do it manually on a printout of the students' names, just so that it's one less step that I have to take when I have to do it digitally later on. But just taking care of those little things, do what you can now so that it doesn't become a big task later on. It doesn't all pile up.
And you also mentioned, for example, doing just moving stuff or reorganizing maybe your
Mm-hmm.
classroom. And it really helps because it's also, that's what I also see when you walk around. You can just tell there's a higher focus. So people, students, they know that you're actually around, you're watching, right? At the same
Right.
time, there's always things to move around, and so it's very, very helpful, to really bring this to the fore and to really improve your practice, right? These are these small wins that you have, and that just kind of, it's also in terms of your health, right? So how has it helped you also in terms of your mental health? And now, of course, you have more experience. A lot of people, especially in their early years, right, they struggle a lot. And usually, I think after 5 years or so, you kind of get into the routine and
Mm-hmm.
you're pretty solid in what you're doing. But usually, you got to get up to these 5 years, and then it really starts really getting really exciting. So tell me about your process and how it really improved really your health, because also I want to emphasize you also have, I believe, 4 kids, right? A husband. So there's a lot of needs there too. So already there, you have to be on point.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah. I honestly, I take advantage of those low concentration modes to keep myself, to keep up with the lists that I have to do. And a list isn't necessarily, it all in equal order, right? I'll think of something that I need to get done. I'll put it on that list, but I know that it's one of those modes, but they're not all the same. But just making the list, taking it off of my mind helps with peace of mind, so that you don't have to be thinking about those things then. In terms of like managing my life, my mental health in that regard, I've really found, well, I love Pilates. That's my thing. I do Pilates every day. And one of the beautiful things about Pilates is that every time you go in there, like, okay, you've got 50 minutes to yourself, right? Be good to yourself. Take time to appreciate the fact that you're taking this time. And although you're concentrating on what you're doing, I find myself in a free flow thinking state as well, because something will come to me while I'm doing Pilates because my mind is just free. I'm not caught up in the hustle and bustle of grading or planning or whatever. I'm intentionally, my body's moving, and so my mind is free. And a lot of times that's when I have really the best ideas. When I can slow my mind down enough to let something actually come to me, to reflect on something and have it just kind of be a positive free flow, I guess, is probably the best way that I can explain it. But Pilates is definitely my happy place. And I have a lot of just positive thoughts that come out of that time. And I think it's important, whatever you do, to just allow yourself the time to let your mind be free. If you can do it an hour a day, that's great. I mean, I get it. I did the drive for many years with 4 kids, and I know what that's like. It's hard. It's hard to be a mom and or a dad who's driving kids around. And but if you can make the most of those minutes in any kind of way, it really pays you back. So maybe you're listening to a podcast while you're driving around that's giving you ideas about how to be more creative or how to be more effective in teaching. Or maybe it's just fiction and you're just escaping a little bit and enjoying a good read while you're driving around. All of those things can help build, I think, a much better mental outlook in life when you give yourself a little bit of a break, because you can't be in teacher mode all the time. You really do need a break from that. I think it'll make you a better teacher if you take those breaks.
Did you start, or at least the idea to write your books? That's not your first book. When you were in those kind of flow states?
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I always kind of wonder, like, what's the next thing? And I don't know, because I don't plan out. I know some authors will plan out like the next three. I'm like, I have no idea. I just hope a good idea comes to me. That's honestly how I just walk through life, like waiting for the next lightning bolt to strike. Well, my light goes out. Um, but that's really kind of how I walk through life. I look for those opportunities. I look for areas that are either going really well, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome, I should share it. Or maybe I hear somebody saying, something isn't going well. I'm like, what kinds of tools do I have that could maybe address that? So looking for those little sparks of creativity is really kind of how I approach it. I don't have a big agenda that I have a big plan of everything I'm going to write, but I do always look for good ideas and ways to make life better, I guess, for teachers and for students. I think what I'm doing, all the practices that I put into place, I think are better for my students in the long run. Um, it's good for me too, though.
You know what you're basically explaining is like that what really happened also to Einstein and other great people who came up with, these incredible insights, that usually, and that's what you're doing, you're working very, very hard. Let's say your job, you're taking very seriously, you pay attention, you focus, you make sure that you give it the right meaning and you do the right things about it, and ultimately it just trickles down and down and down and down, and ultimately again you have something out is a new idea that ultimately leads again to a new book. And I think that's oftentimes what we actually do if we have a really clear purpose in life. We do everything, we work very, very hard, because intuition ultimately, Einstein was like, for years he was studying in Bern in his office, because he had so much time, right? Because he was a clerk, an office clerk, right? And in the meantime, he was like studying all the time, writing his equation, and ultimately he came with it up. But that was only the case because he was studying it every single day for years, right? And that's what you're basically are doing as well. And I think that's really what you need in order to really come up with such a powerful book, such a concise and really insightful book. Because I really, I really believe that this highly improves every single teacher's life and effectiveness, and ultimately it really trickles down, obviously, to our wonderful students. So, medium concentration. Tell us about medium concentration.
Yeah, so medium concentration is more like maybe a 15-minute segment where you could, the kids might be maybe watching a video, and you might be able to get like some short responses graded on a test or on a writing assessment that's shorter. It's not something, again, that you're going to be able to like sit down and really have total focus. And so you've got to be mindful about what you're trying to accomplish during that time. And I should also say as well, you kind of have to look at the modes like the speed limit. It's constantly changing, and you just have to pay attention to it, because sometimes you think you're heading into medium concentration mode, and suddenly it's like, wow, they're asking me a million questions and I've got to go back to low concentration mode. Or maybe you get lucky and you thought it was going to be medium and it extends and you actually get into some serious high concentration mode. But you just have to be flexible so that you can kind of read the room and use your time as wisely as you possibly can. So for medium concentration, that's kind of it. Like, I'm not going to get a super focused amount of work done, but I could be like you said, with grading, or maybe planning something to move ahead. Um, One of the things that I do as a teacher, we have something called a week at a glance, which is a Google document for each week of the term. And so sometimes in medium concentration mode, you've got a good chunk of time to get something done. I'll copy it over from one term to the next, and part of that task is really just kind of updating links. Like the opening day has a survey, so I've got to redo the survey, make sure the right link is on there. It's not deep thought kind of activity, but it does take about 15 minutes to knock that out. And so that's something that I can do while the kids are watching a video, have, one eye on the classroom, one eye on what I'm doing on the computer, but it doesn't take deep thought. It just takes time to get those things done. And sometimes, honestly, that's the kind of stuff that I'll do while I'm watching TV at night, because it really doesn't take any concentration at all, but it does take time. So it's better suited for a time when, uh, as opposed to high concentration mode. Like if you've got a planning day at school, or you've got a big chunk of time, the last thing you want to do is something really just repetitive or manual that doesn't require any concentration. That's just a complete waste of that time. It's much, in my opinion, I'd rather give up, and I don't see it as giving up, but I'd rather do it while watching TV at night, because it doesn't take anything away from my life to do it at that time, and it frees me up to do something that does require concentration while I'm at school in that high concentration mode.
And I also appreciate that you mentioned that you have to also be able to really chunk, task down. So explain a little bit more and why it is so important that you actually have to chunk and you don't always have to finish actually a task. I think that
Right.
also, again, it's really important to actually read really the book and really buy it and really go on solutiontree.com and type in Teacher Time Management by Alan Linnihan and really get a copy because it will truly change your life. Now, again, to go back to really chunking it down, right?
Mhm.
So, walk us through these kind of steps, and when you realize that, hey, you got to be flexible.
Right, right. I think as a new teacher, I still remember the feeling of, I've taught this unit and now they've written the test, or now they've written the papers, and I'm taking this home and I'm going to read them, and I'm just going to just be glorified by how much I have imparted my knowledge on them, and they're just going to validate me, right? And I want that whole chunk of time. My husband was in the military at the time, so he would actually be in the field sometimes, like, oh, I've got a whole weekend, I'm just going to read those essays. Like, it's a sick new teacher thing. I mean, you really have to get over that sense of fulfillment, I guess, because it's unsustainable. It really is unsustainable. And honestly, it's not healthy to sit and process through all of that all at once. And if they're not as glorious as you think they're going to be, you're going to be disappointed halfway through the stack. So forging through when you're already feeling a little disgruntled is probably not fair to the second half of the stack. So chunking it down gives you a fresh, clean slate every time you sit down to look at it. So that's one rationale. But also, you can get a fair amount done in that medium concentration mode just by prepping for what you're going to do. So, for example, if it's a test, I know a lot of things are done electronically now, so this may not apply, but if you've got a paper test, grading through the objective portion during medium concentration time is super easy to do because you really don't have to focus much. You're using a key, or it's just very minimal thought to go through some short answer stuff. But do all that stuff during medium concentration mode, and then save the part where you actually have to concentrate, maybe the essays or the longer response portions, and do that during your high concentration mode. Um, because taking the time to get yourself organized and to go through things that don't really take concentration, when you're wasting all of that in one chunk of time, when you have the time to be in high concentration mode, it's really a waste of those minutes. You only need it for the high concentration focused activities like grading the essays. And again, with those, I do think it's probably better not to do them all at once, because just a fresh mind is always, I've been a distance runner before. I am much better on mile 1 than I am in mile 13. So, if you're going to impart that into your students, it's just natural that you're going to be a little bit done with it halfway through the stack. So if you can give them the benefit of the doubt of starting over with a fresh mind the next time, if you've got those opportunities to chunk it down, I think it's probably in your students' best interest as well. So
Yeah, and actually, it's very important because they also did a study. I think it was in Israel that they said like they can really tell, you know, about the judges when they made, judgments about cases, right? So usually they could really tell, the closer it went to, let's say, lunchtime, it was severe. So you can really tell how important and how impactful it actually is. And so it's really serious and really much what you're doing here too, as well, right? Because at some point you get kind of tired, you don't have really the same focus anymore. And so it creates, kind of inequalities. You could even do, it's just we are human, right? It's such a good point. How do you see writing and teaching in paper and handwriting? How do you see it? For example, I'm a huge, again, a believer. Actually, I because I saw huge results. I actually made my students again use more and more pen and paper because I
okay.
really think it is important to, well, first and foremost, just to keep the skill, at least to be to some extent fluent in handwriting. But it also, obviously we know in terms of retention, it helps greatly. But how do you find the balance? Because again, you said with pen and paper, I think it has to do, at least in my experience as well, is when you have pen and paper and you actually work through it, it's a very different sentiment and feeling than you actually do it on the computer. So if you watch at the screen, for example, I know I have to be very cautious. I can't really watch and talk more than maybe 90 minutes on a screen. It will just exhaust me mentally. And so there's something really that tells me, yeah, I gotta go now outside and really do something physical. Otherwise I really feel like mentally exhausted, and it can really have some negative effects. That's what I feel in my case. So I'm wondering about you. How do
Yeah.
you see this whole debate? Obviously, there are different views, right? But I of course, I also want to mention I do it in a hybrid form, but I still find it actually important that they actually do it. Also in terms of ChatGPT, because you mentioned actually also what a powerful tool it is, also for students actually. And I see it the same way as you do. I find it's an excellent tool, but at the same time, in order for a teacher, let's say, to analyze a student's analytical skills, let's say, it's really hard if you give them an essay to write and they can write it at home. Of course, today you have tools to actually see if they got it or not. But then again, we come back and then ultimately you ask them whether, rather than writing an essay, you have a couple of bullet points and then you actually make a presentation. In doing so, you actually show or can show me if you actually understood some of the concepts, you know. So I'm curious at what you think about this whole discussion.
The AI aspect is super interesting to me. I use it in a number of different ways as a teacher. For students, I teach AP Lang, and so this is the first year that the students are doing it the test electronically. So up until this year, I've been grading the handwritten essays, and there's something to it, honestly, because you can see their thought process. You can see them crossing words out and putting in better vocabulary. You can see them drawing arrows to, this really works better up here. You can't see that thought to process electronically. And also, like you mentioned, you don't necessarily know if it's their work, if it's their ideas, if they're not handwriting it. Um, so, I guess I'm a little bit torn. I think it can help us in so many ways to to produce a nice finished product. But right now, I'm in the mode of trying to teach kids how to think and find their own voice. I already know that ChatGPT does a wonderful job of finding voice, but I want to know if they can find their own voice. So I think we have to not jump all in either direction. Like I'm not in favor of going completely just paper pencil forever, because it it's inevitable. AI is here, and the kids really need to learn how to use it. But here's an example. I run a scholarship program called Distinguished Young Women, and one of the elements of the competition is a public speaking question that they receive prior to the program. And at the local level, they get it ahead of time. They can try it out on their friends, their family. At the state level, they get it ahead of time, but they don't have access to phone or electronics, and they're not supposed to share it with anybody. And then by the time they get to nationals, they get the question on stage. So they have to be able to just think, and to know what they want to say. So when you see a program where they got it ahead of time, and the questions, on as they're answering them on stage, they all get the same question, they sound robotic. They sound like the same person. And they're not recognizing. You can go to ChatGPT, it will construct grammatically a very nice answer for you, but you are not in it, right? You are completely missing from the equation. And the question is supposed to elicit something about who you are and what is your voice. And if you're allowing a ChatGPT or a similar AI device to speak for you, it's probably not capturing who you are. And then I feel like we're missing something. And so I think there's going to be a fine line between, I'm sure people felt the same way about typing things or computers at some point, like, how do we know it's really theirs? But I do feel like kids, my job is to know that they are learning how to think and learning how to find their voice. And so I guess I'm not giving you a very straight answer here in terms of which one I prefer, but I see value in the pen and paper. But we need to learn how to teach the kids to take that to the next step, maybe by using AI in the future. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, to be honest.
No, this is actually very good. I think at times you also have to consider all the decisions and choices that they have, and there is today just an overload of choices. And so for us it's also important to actually narrow the choices it down, because again, research also shows that it just gives you an overload, right? You can't, if you have like 100 different brands of toothpaste, for example, ultimately you just pick one, or you just go with the one that you always go, because you can't really go. There's never the right choice, you know. There's just basically the right, you make the best out of it, whatever you go with. But today we have this illusion that we have all those kind of choices, right? It's really tough. And to your point, when we give, and it's actually very interesting, because in my previous school, they actually said you cannot use ChatGPT. So it was the model UN. So they were very strict that they can't use, precisely as you mentioned, right? It becomes very, very robotic. And I think, again, it goes back to what the future looks like. And ultimately, it's almost like we have to again teach ourselves, especially our younger generation, to actually, interact with real human beings, you know, because this is really ultimately what is at stake. Because ultimately, this complex society only functions with trust, and trust is really the currency today that holds everything together, right? When we were back hunter gatherers, we were the small, we knew everyone, right? But today we don't have this choice, and therefore I think it's so important that we contemplate this really seriously, and actually where it will go. And again, as you say, we obviously have to train our kids also to use it to their advantage. But I think to really be on the spot and ultimately, have just a couple of words and you have to make something up or whatever, I think that's invaluable for anyone.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's fascinating to me to see them construct those thoughts and see how they can put them together in an essay. I mean, we have controls that we can do even with electronically. We can shut down their browsers. We can, there are things that we can do within our control to make sure that it is their own voice that they're typing. Um, but that ability to think and to pull from resources within their own brain, I think, is really important. It's the argumentative essay, teaching them how to you have to have some substance to be able to defend your argument beyond just your opinion. And so just teaching them to be more aware of the world around them, and to also to recognize the world around them. Like you've read things in history class, you've been in your AP Psych class. Like what could you pull from those different contexts to help build the arguments that you have? So helping them to make those connections, find the pieces that are already in their brain, and stop compartmentalizing and kind of pulling from that to show that they can think, to defend their thought patterns with actual substance beyond just, well, this is what I think. um, and so that's a fun process as well, because they're pulling in things that I didn't teach them. I'm just hopefully teaching them to recognize the pathways of, you may have some information from a documentary that you watched, or from a conversation that you had with your grandfather, or something that you observed, just in life, helping them to find those areas of those resources, I guess, within themselves, is really important. Because if they're always just going to ChatGPT to defend their arguments, they're not learning how to think, to create their own arguments. Um, and so I think at this stage for me, teaching high school kids how to think, I think it's really important to help them to discover the resources that they have within their own mind, and also to recognize what those deficits might be. Because sometimes they realize, well, I haven't watched any documentaries. Well, then maybe you could. Maybe, or maybe you could read a book, or maybe you could listen to a podcast and start adding to that collection a little bit. So, which is a fun, when you get back to the what is your news source, you realize sometimes what their limitations are.
You know what? Same here. I had a wonderful student. He was such a wonderful kid, very well behaved, outstanding, just a wonderful kid. And he told me something, and I'm not going into that, but it had to do with the US election outcome. And he told me something really like 10,000, no, 10 million votes, where whatever. And then I asked him, "Oh yeah, seriously? Where did you get this news from? I'm curious. I really wanna read that. That's interesting." He said the same thing, TikTok,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was like, "Yeah, it's really interesting, wonderful. I mean, we have such wonderful kids, but it also comes down again what you're talking about, like how to think, right, and really also develop this understanding that there are different ways that you can actually interpret the same situation, right? And people might have the same noble and moral motivation, but they just think the way they go about is the better way than the other in order to achieve the same goal, for example, more justice or whatever. but in a different way, right? It's the same thing when it comes to politics. Usually you have the positions, but if you go really underneath, ultimately we agree on basically everything that we want to improve our society as a result, right? But we disagree maybe how we go about it, right? And so, yeah, I think really how to think today is the most important thing. So wonderful, and it's also exciting. So it must give you extremely joy teaching. Tell us about your teaching and what it does to you from a positive perspective.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because I'm at the point where I could retire, and I'm always just surprised when people ask me, when are you retiring? I'm like, I'm putting no thought into that. I mean, I know I should financially and think about all those things, but I love what I do. And I've always said the day that I don't, I'm done. That's why would I spend any time doing something that I didn't love? And to see these kids learn how to grow their minds and be able to actually support their thoughts with something beyond just this is what I think, to me is just so gratifying. And then you combine it with being able to get up and actually speak those words and feel confident with it. That's even more powerful to me. The combination of those two things. So um, I feel like if you are a centered, happy, healthy person and you walk into your classroom every day feeling that way, I'm hoping that spreads. I'm hoping that kids would see, there is joy in adulthood, and it is possible to love your job and to to just get up and do it every day and find meaning in that, find satisfaction in that. Whatever they do, not everybody's called to be a teacher for sure, but whatever you do it well and find your place in this world where you feel like it's a good fit, because we only get one go around as far as I know. So I want to do it right. you know? I want to enjoy this ride, and I'm hoping that I'm spreading that to my students and inspiring them to find what it is that makes them tick, because that's kind of what it's all about.
I can't agree more. I think finding really the job that you can somehow contribute to a better society is just, that is really what happiness and truly living is. I think that's the best advice, and I think it's also, it really keeps you young, right? You have purpose. And I always think about it must be tough all of a sudden. You stop working, and you kind of, what do you do with all the time that you have in your hands? And of course there are different professions, and sometimes just in terms of physically, it's just you have to stop, right? I mean, if construction, for example, that really makes sense. But there's a lot of thing, if you still have to choose, that's just beautiful and it's inspiring. And by the way, actually, retirement, this system that we have, actually, I think that was only before the World War II or so it started, or after World War I, because they realized that, what, we don't have enough jobs, and therefore, for the younger generation to come. So there too, I think it's wonderful, and it's really inspiring, really, to hear that, because again, it really shows like the success that you have in your life, because teaching is a very demanding profession. So how did you, especially in your early stages, handle the stress?
Well, as I mentioned, my husband was military, so I from an early stage planned everything around when he was out of out in the field. Um, so really just managed my time that way through grad school and then getting into teaching. We didn't have kids right away when I was teaching. And then I took an 8-year break when my kids were little and worked as a freelance writer during that time. So I give people a lot of credit for managing little kids while they're teaching, because it's a demanding job. It really is. Um, and so when my youngest was 2 when I went back, and I was so ready just jump in and do something professionally again and be challenged in that way. So I think I was just maybe a little bit more willing to put the time in at that point. And I wasn't brand new to it, so it wasn't like starting out fresh in that regard. But I think I've shared a lot of it with my kids. Obviously, my I've had all four of my kids in class, so they've they've been it's like bring your child to work day for like 8 years for me. So I've they've been a part of this world with me, and it's been a good experience in that regard. So I think it's important for kids to see parents doing something meaningful and to do something that they feel fulfilled doing as well, that they find joy in that. And I was super involved as the class advisor for the juniors. So my kids got to know my class officers really well. It was pretty common for them to come over on Sunday nights and bake cookies and do interview prep. Honestly, we did a lot of that. It was a lot of fun. So I guess just kind of bring them into this world as well, kind of blending the two was helpful as well to keep that love for both alive. I never really tried to separate it entirely. It's kind of impossible when you live in the community. You're surrounded by your students all the time. So
That is beautiful, and congratulations, because I always say, parents are truly my heroes in taking this responsibility up and having four children. And, motherhood to me is the most important job. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the luxury to actually do it and be with the kids, but I think it has implication, and the implication it has, we will only see, you know, down the road. But I think it's extremely important that they can really build these attachment and so on, like in terms of their psychological development as well. I think it's so important. But again, that's not, that's just how it is. But it really speaks volumes, and I think it's important. Unfortunately, we don't give the time that that they actually deserve, and that's really that they have their mother, especially in their early stages. So I just want to touch quickly on the way you handled the book and what the biggest obstacles were while writing the book. So touch a little bit on what was the biggest obstacles you faced and ultimately overcame.
well, that's a great question. You know, I think everybody always, at least I do, when you first have an idea, just floating it out for the first time, and you think it's a great idea, and then you kind of have to test the waters a little bit, see what other people think. Is there something out there like this already? Is this actually, is there substance to this? Is this going to be you know big enough to turn into something real? So I think this, for me, it's usually kind of that self-doubt in the beginning phase of, am I really onto something here or not? But Solution Tree does just such a phenomenal job of sending it out twice, actually, throughout the whole process. They send it, I think it's just maybe 6 different readers. So after the first kind of extended proposal, I don't know, it's, maybe an extended outline, maybe the first chapter written out. So not a huge, you haven't written the whole thing, but they send it out, get some feedback, and that really helps you to get a sense of, is there something to this? Is this worth pursuing? And then they send it out again when the manuscript is done, before it goes through all the final stages. And so getting that feedback was very reassuring, to know that they're not necessarily is there a market for this, that it's going to sell, but is it going to help people? Is there something to this that matters to me more than anything else, that this would be helpful to somebody, and it could improve somebody's teaching career to help them in that way. So that was probably the biggest thing, because honestly, the timing of it was really kind of perfect. When they wanted the actual bulk of the writing, it was summertime, and so I could go into focus mode with writing during that time. So I wrote the bulk of it during a summer, and then when I it's kind of like playing hot potato with Solution Tree. I don't know how other publishers do it, but they work in Word instead of Google, and so if they have it, I can't touch it. There's nothing I'm working on. So there would be months at a time when I didn't, it was like hot potato. You've got it. So I was doing nothing with, theoretically with the book, thinking about it, but not actively working on it. So it was really manageable with a teaching lifestyle to be able to do this primarily in the summer. And then when I did get the aspects that I needed to go over on my own, they give me like a maybe a 3-week window to go over revisions on something. So I was able to fit it in that regard. But yeah, it would be a much bigger struggle to sit down and write, like, let's knock out the first 4 chapters in, I don't know, February or something like that. I wouldn't be able to function that way. But so yeah, I think probably just the original, floating the idea, getting that feedback, and having that faith that you're onto something good. Because sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's like, well, that might have been good 10 years ago, but we're, kind of past that now. So um, finding that spark and believing it, but then getting the affirmation that it really is something worth pursuing is maybe the biggest mental hurdle to get past.
Did you sometimes also get down the rabbit hole because there's so many different ideas and so many different ways you can go? So how did you handle that?
You kind of actually forget what's even in it sometimes by the time you get to the final version. Like, wait, did we keep that in there or not? Did I write about that? Um, yeah, you have a lot of things that don't necessarily make it into the final version of it. Um, and it's hard for me to separate because for me, it's just my philosophy of teaching, and this is one aspect that I'm focusing on for this book. But my previous book about using video in the classroom is kind of intertwined because I can't. It's not like two separate units that I teach. It's me as a teacher, and so sometimes I kind of get mixed up in my head like which one's in which book because it's all kind of one. It's one philosophy to me in terms of just being the best teacher that I can be, and what does that look like, and how do you do it? Um, so I'm not sure if that answered your question fully or not, but that's kind of where my mind went.
Absolutely. And also, how do you handle if you have, let's say, a new ideas or you read something? Do you write it down? Do you have a specific book, or do you have like, let's say, a Word document? How do you do that? Because, it's also a question of really how to organize yourself effectively, which this book also really is about, right? And to know where you actually can find it again, right? And I love those that you actually shared how you organized your folder, and I was actually going and adjusted my folders because I'm struggling with this for now years, and it's not an easy thing. It's really all about experience, and I all the time I face the same thing, that I basically have too many folders, right? But then I looked at, because I was always like wondering, hopefully one day someone will really share like a picture of, you know how they organize their folders,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you really did it, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm freakishly organized when it comes to my folders. But there are so many times when I would be looking for something and I couldn't find it, and it was so frustrating because I haven't always been as good at knowing how to organize things. And now I love the feature where you can share it into another folder, like you can share the in Google. So now I'll have a folder in my public speaking class that sometimes I might want also in my AP Lang class, and I can share it there so it shows up in both places. And I didn't know about that for a very long time. So now the shortcut feature is one of my favorites to really keep things hyper organized. So yeah, it really, every time I find something quickly, I feel like it's a win. Like I just saved myself some time because it really is what it all comes down to. Like you can teach a lesson, and the kids have no idea how much time you put into creating that lesson, whether it was an easy on the spot thing or if you really spent hours putting it into it. So my goal is always put the least amount of time into it and produce the best quality that you possibly can, so that you're getting the best out of your minutes, right? Just making them work for you. So a lot of the things that I do are just about finding those little shortcuts, finding those little ways. And so if it's organizing folders so you find things faster, but I also feel like sharing that is super important. And so whether it's with a new colleague that's teaching the same course, I just share the whole thing. Right. So for public speaking, I've got a teacher who's teaching it for the first time at our partner school. And I just open it and just share the whole thing. Like, I don't have to make copies of resources. I think about the olden days, right? When people would literally hand you a file of stuff that they'd copied. It's so easy to just share a link, have everything open, share the link, go for it, use whatever you want. I wish I'd had some of those resources myself from people. And so now I'm just thinking, how can I share this and make this easier for other people as well? Because it's been a lot of time for me to create it all. And if I can save people time and having to do that again, that's a win. That's a win for students, I think. So, yeah.
No, excellent. And now I invite everyone to really go on solutiontree.com and really buy and order a copy of Alan Linnihan's book, Teacher Time Management: How to Prioritize Your Day so you can enjoy your evening. Lastly, what makes you feel truly alive?
I think the thing that makes me feel truly alive, it's those moments when you see, whether it's, I think of my kids, my own personal kids, but I also think of my students as my extended kids, right? And as much as people say you shouldn't live vicariously through others, I think as a teacher and as a mom, I get to do that, right? Because my whole purpose is in teaching others to find their voice, to find themselves. And when that happens, it's the best thing ever. So whether it's, somebody reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, I got this on the ACT after working with you," or "I got into this college," or my own kids saying, "Hey, I just got a promotion at work." Those are the moments for me that I just feel so satisfied, because I didn't do it, but I hope that I was a part in giving them the tools to open their minds and find their way. And really, the joy that they have is the most important thing, because if they can make a ton of money, but if they're not happy doing it, it's not a win, right? But when somebody comes back to you with a success story in their life, um, that's just the best feeling ever. And sometimes you don't even know you're doing it, right? Like, I had a student reach out to me from my first year here at the school where I currently teach. So maybe 2004, 2005. Reached out to me on Facebook about a year ago and was just living his dream as like a rock star. He was literally like performing in the area, wanted to let me know. And I'm like, "Oh, that's so awesome." I look up the tickets, they were like $500. Like, okay, well, I really wish you good success with that concert, but I think I'm gonna have to sit that one out. But just knowing that, he reached out to me and said, "Thanks for pushing me to be creative and to let me know that that was okay, that I didn't have to follow the normal track." Like, whatever your passion is, just go for it. Just find that and find what you love to do. And that's what I love. That when they share that back to me, and I find that they've followed their dreams and they found something they loved and they're making a difference in their life and in the world, that's a win. So that's what I love.
Thank you so much for being on the show and really being truly a gift for myself and really to the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alan Linnihan. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.